All right, we're going to try this again. We just did a whole video and apparently I got muted at some point. What I want to talk about today is, the obvious. I mean, what's going on with the soybean market? Clearly, we have a trade deal with China. It is a big deal. I mean, it depends on what the specifics of the trade deal are. We've all been trying to filter through those. I'll just talk to you about it a little bit. Obviously, last week we came in here highly anticipated meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi. Wednesday night into Thursday is when we were told. Of course, they're about 12 hours ahead of us that they were going to meet, and then we would, essentially find out, what do we get? What is this deal going to look like? I woke up in the middle of the night, like some of you probably did as well. Probably 3 o'clock in the morning, I saw the markets down 20 cents or so. And I thought, man, this deal must not have gone very well. Went and did my morning workout, took a shower, came back, and the market's up 10 cents. I mean, very volatile trade since, we essentially got this deal. Now, trying to figure out exactly what it was an issue, because essentially what we were told up front is that China was going to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans this season, and then 25 million metric tons of soybeans in 25 or in 26, 27, and 28. Well, what's this season mean? Does it mean this marketing year? Does it mean this calendar year? And so clearly there was a fair amount of pushback on, hey, what exactly does this mean? Secretary Rollins came out and said that essentially this means that they are going to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans here between now and January. And so that's a big deal. And why is it a big deal? Is because, instead of it being 12 million metric tons by next September, we're looking at 12 plus 25 by January of 27. And so that's a fair amount of demand that we did not know whether we were going to have or not. And so, I want to roll through a few slides here. I am going to check and make sure that my mic is not, is not muted. So what I want to do is I want to go through my slide deck. We'll share this. And then I'm going to come back and make sure that we are not muted. And we are not muted. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. I want to look first at export inspections. And so essentially from the corn side of things, exports have been phenomenal this year. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And so that's a big deal, considering a lot of folks felt like the USDA was way too aggressive in their projection for exports of corn out of the U.S. Last year was a great year for exports. Clearly, with, for instance, Ukraine being offline, essentially, whenever it comes to exports, we were able to pick up some of that business, first of all. Second of all, there's no question Brazil had a big crop last year, but the years previous to that, the combined amount of corn that Brazil, Ukraine, Argentina had was just not much. It was a multi-year low. And so what they did was they put the U.S., in a situation where they could actually export a fair amount of corn. This year is even going better than what it was a year ago. So if we look at, for instance, this ethanol situation, though, on the other side of this demand deal, it's a little concerning right now in that profit margins are not all that great, the gross margins, if you will. And so, some of these guys have had to go out and chase corn that they didn't think they'd have to chase. What have we seen in a lot of areas whenever harvest is getting close to done is that we've actually seen basis get, a fair amount better. And so whenever basis improves like that, I mean, clearly if they have to go chase bushels they didn't think they were going to have to chase, that's going to drive their margins down a little bit. So from a demand perspective, I mean, we got a report out next week. I'll detail it on the podcast this following week. But essentially what we're probably looking at is that demand's going to have to take some adjustments. Can we get more exports into the balance sheet? Yes, we probably can. They've got ammo in the tank to do something like that. But one thing they have to be very concerned with is, for instance, those cattle are not coming north out of Mexico to be fed in the U.S. like they had been previous to screwworm. What that essentially tells me is that our feed usage is way too high. And I'm talking maybe 400 million bushels too high. If that's the case, exports are not going to come up that much. But what's the other factor, of course, is going to be production. Now, I've heard from a lot of you throughout the Corn Belt who've shared with me your stories as far as yields were concerned. I've heard a lot of people say not quite as good as a year ago. I've had a few people say all-time record, and I've heard a few people say quite a bit under a year ago. My head personally is in the low 180s. If we do get to the low 180s, considering we've got 90 million acres harvested, I mean, you could certainly drop production 300 to 400 million bushels if we see this yield come down enough. If that's the case, I don't think that you're looking at an overwhelmingly bearish report to come out here this next week. And so, I just look at the chart here. I mean, essentially, as you can see, corn's rallied here lately. Nothing outlandish. And if we look at the long-term implications here, you can certainly draw some lines on this and see, that we're going to run into some resistance in this particular area. The other thing of resistance is that yellow line coming across the chart. That is your 200-day moving average. That's the only moving average we are not above at this time. And so there's no doubt that this corn market has the potential to go up and establish itself, above that 200-day potentially. But what's it going to take to do that is probably going to take something along the lines of a bullish report. And so whether we get a bullish report or not is anybody's guess, but there's no doubt that, that possibility certainly exists. We've seen stranger things happen. So, if we look at, for instance, soybeans, we're going to talk beans for a little bit as far as the Chinese trade deal goes. Definitely giving us a bit of a boost here. If we look at from a standpoint of what are these beans worth, though, clearly the U.S. was very competitive for quite some time. Part of that, of course, was Brazil understood that we were not in the game, so to speak. China was not buying any U.S. beans. And so what we've seen since the trade deal is that Brazilian values have really plummeted. And what it's done is made them very competitive on the world market once again. And so it'd be very interesting to see what China does if beans are going to be cheaper for them to source out of Brazil, considering they're being essentially forced into buying some beans as a part of this trade deal. And so, what does a trade deal mean, though? I mean, versus what we've seen in the past as far as exports to China. As you can see here, we've got 25, 25, and 25 for 26, 27, and 28 as far as million metric tons go. But what's the 18 million? I mean, essentially, we've already shipped almost 6 million bushels, 6 million metric tons of soybeans to China, since the first of the year. And so with that being the case, if they do an additional 12, that's going to put them up to that 18 area. The 25, as you can see, is not quite as high as these last several years, but at the same time, when you look at the 25 million metric tons, that's a baseline. They said that's the minimum that they would purchase. And so if Brazil would run into weather issues driving their values higher, there's no doubt that we could see something in excess of this. Why this is important is that if this truly is the case, and this is some sort of a guarantee, if you will, what that's going to do is give us the satisfaction that we've got a fairly good export book of business that we can rely on, so to speak. And given the fact that we've really ramped up domestic consumption of soybeans, whenever we look at, for instance, renewable diesel, the crush industry continues to expand, then we should have awfully good demand for soybeans. Now, if we look at what's going on in Brazil, because here's the thing, now that you've got a trade deal, if you would have weather issues out of Brazil, there's no doubt this bean market could be explosive. At the same time, they planted about 3% more acres again this year. And so, with that being the case, there's no doubt that they can withstand some weather issues. And so their pace is a little bit of a slow start, no doubt. They've had some weather abnormalities. As you can see, they've been extremely dry. As far as your map on the left shows, but on the right, it pretty much shows that you're going to get a pretty good amount of rainfall here over the next couple of weeks. And if that's the case, it's certainly going to be conducive for them to resume planting unless they just get way too much rain. As you can see, some areas are called to get way too much rain. This is going to be very closely watched over the next 8, 10, 12 weeks. This is going to be crunch time for Brazil. So if they have weather issues, we could certainly count on some sort of rally action. There's your bean chart. A lot better looking chart than corn. Of course, we just absolutely skyrocketed. Last time we were this high, as you can see, would have been back in springtime, summertime of 24. It's been quite some time since we've had beans up here above $11. One thing I'd tell you is whenever beans go establish themselves above $11, they don't typically stay there for very long. Historically, the bean market, when it goes to $11, tends to go to 12. And I'm not trying to be bullish. I'm just telling you that historically, that's essentially what happens. And so with that being the case, you always talk about trying to lock in some sort of worst case scenario, trying to be in a situation where essentially you don't have all your eggs in one basket. And by all means, I think that that's something that we need to do. And so my personal opinion here is lock in a worst case scenario with the rally that we've been given. This rally has certainly been something that a lot of us didn't expect to be to this degree. I look at 26 beans, for instance, the guys that I work with, ag market, we've pushed our sales. I talk about it. Uh, I talk about it in my weekend article, and essentially what I'm trying to do is just keep you up to date on what our sales program looks like, because by all means, it's in my opinion, locking in a floor with a chance to go up is probably the best way to attack this market, at least on a percentage of bushels. Now, if a person wants to HTA some beans at 11 or higher, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I've actually heard of some people actually stepping in and doing a fall contract. If that's something that you can make work on your farm, I've heard of folks getting 1060 to 1075 for beans for fall of 26. If that works on your operation, there's no reason whatsoever not to step in and do a few. But by all means, if Brazil has big weather issues, there's no question in my mind that this bean market would go to 12 and above. And if that's the case, I still want to have some beans sitting around to be able to price. So as far as the corn market goes, in all honesty, I'm not super excited about selling corn right in here. With beans rallying the way they have, it calls into question to me, how many acres are we going to really end up getting this year? I mean, could we be in a situation where we're having to buy corn acres? And by all means, that is an absolute possibility, especially if you keep November 26 beans at $11 or higher. So at this stage of the game, we're still not quite the spring insurance price that we saw last year, at which most of us didn't think we could make money. Just looking at our input costs. Input costs this year are higher. And so to me, I just don't have an appetite to get super aggressive, in this 465 area. So I'd like to see a push above 475, maybe even 480 to $5 before I get very aggressive at all. And again, if I do that, I'm going to do that with a limited risk type position that gives me the flexibility to see the market go higher and be able to participate in that. So thanks for tuning in today. It looks like this one actually went off correctly. Questions, let me know. I saw one come in, and I will try to address these as we go. But tune into the newsletter as well. Shoot me any questions you've got, comments, suggestions, and I'll do my best to try to address those. Next week, we'll be going over the report, though. We're going to talk about, hey, what do we think is going to happen here? What are the possibilities? What are the ramifications? And hopefully, these markets hold themselves together between now and then. So have a great day.